From Field Pass Hockey Southern Command, this is the Inside the SPHL podcast. Here is your host, James Hayes.
Welcome to this week's episode of Inside the SPHL. We got a pretty good show lined up for you today. I got my buddy Joel Silverberg on here, and we're going to do a little walk through the league. No player this week. I figured Joel was enough of a celebrity guest. So Joel, welcome to the show, man. Thanks for joining me.
No, thank you so much for having me back. Glad to be on again.
Yeah, it was fun. I figured we needed to do it again, and this time we'll not leave Evansville out because we can't do that twice, right? Tommy will have us both.
So. We could leave them out again just for fun. That could be the tradition.
Yeah, that's right. And then that's how I'll get Tommy to come on next week, and then we'll just talk nothing but Evansville. So
yeah.
But last week I was finally able to get an Evansville player on, and on this podcast I've been saying time and time again, I'm like, I promise Evansville I'm working to get a player, and just things haven't lined up, and finally I got Plevy last week, and I think Evansville fans finally don't think I'm a liar that forgets about them. So hopefully I'm in good standing with them again.
Absolutely.
But yeah, we had a great week, a great weekend of hockey. It seemed like every weekend we got like 3 or 4 games that go into overtimes and shootouts, and overall, what was your takeaway from the league? Doesn't it feel kind of like these teams know that it's getting to crunch time, playoffs are around the corner, and things are just tightening up? Doesn't it seem like that a little bit?
I think so, because you see Peoria, they have their 10-game win streak end, but they're going on a 10-game winning streak. They're starting to really turn up the heat. Fayetteville's on a 6-game streak, so Fayetteville's starting to figure some things out after they kind of went through a bit of a skid through December and January where they weren't playing their best hockey. You start to see Quad City kind of start to really showcase that speed they have on the perimeter, and so then they end Peoria's 10-game win streak. And so I think you're starting to see the teams that when you and I talked at the beginning of the season, okay, the teams that we might see making moves towards the end, those teams are starting to have a sense of urgency. You're starting to see Birmingham, as you've seen it down there. Birmingham has really kind of woken up a little bit. They've had some big wins, beat Knoxville on Thursday. They beat Huntsville not too long ago. They've been really competitive against some really good teams, had a come from behind win over Roanoke. So you're starting to see teams that feel like they can still make a run to get into the postseason, starting to have that urgency that says, hey, we've got to wake up, and we've got to wake up quick. And then Knoxville and Huntsville in a battle for the number 1 spot at the Knoxville Civic Coliseum on Friday. Packed house, Preds night. So the 2 teams that have partnerships with the Nashville Predators, they put on a game that had a very playoff-like atmosphere. So I definitely think you're starting to see that now that we're in the second half of the regular season schedule.
Yeah, and rosters are finally starting to kind of settle down. There's still guys getting called up and whatnot, but it seems like the rosters everything's kind of settled down somewhat, and the players are really getting to be able to gel together. It is something else I'm starting to see around the league too.
I would agree. I think you're still seeing some teams that had several or more players get called up, starting to get some of those guys back. But I think one example would be, I guess would be a team like Roanoke that had all these call-ups right around Christmas, and so they kind of struggled for a little bit trying to adjust to that. But then all these new guys that have come in, they're all starting to find their place and settle into that lineup. They've gotten a couple of those guys back, but so many call-ups that they had to deal with throughout the month of December that now they're starting to settle in. And so you're right. So we're seeing the lineup start to settle, but you're still seeing some teams that are waiting for certain key players to come back over the last 2 months of the year.
Yeah, and that's tough as a fan of this league, like I am, and to see, you want these guys to come back so that these other teams can play competitive hockey, but at the same time, I don't want to see a guy like Jimmy Peretta come back to Knoxville because I know he can do better up top.
I do.
Man, it's fun. I know you do. It's fun to watch him, and he's just solid. But you at the same time, you want him to make it at the next level, and it's so tough. It's the minor league hockey struggle. That's what it is.
Yeah, and I think that's kind of been the way for a lot, and really especially goalies. Some of the best goalies in the league just haven't been playing. Like, some of them are slowly starting to get removed from the SPHL leaderboards because they don't meet the qualifications for the number of minutes played to be on there. So like Parita's been gone since early December. Jason Pulaski's been called up for Fayetteville. Bailey Birkin's on like his second stint in the ECHL and has been called up. Corbin Kaspersky, started in the AHL the other night and picked up a win. So it's all these different players for different, goalies, different teams, guys that have been important for whatever level of success their team has been having. Hunter Vorva wasn't called up, but he wasn't playing. Huntsville had an e-bug for a while. And so where was Vorva? Was it COVID related, injury related, suspension related? There was never an official report made. So Huntsville's riding the Zane Steves train. But for a while, they didn't have Hunter Vorva or Max Milasek. So especially for goalies, you're seeing that where, some of the better players in the league, if anybody comes back, can that make the difference in being a playoff team, being a championship contender? So goalies especially, but you're right, across the board, it's call-ups definitely are something that affects the SPHL throughout the course of the season.
Yeah. I mean, how dangerous will Knoxville and Huntsville be if Milasek and Peretta both come back to the SPHL down the stretch? I mean, that's both teams have found ways to win games without them, and they can win with them. So that'll be interesting if those guys do work their way back into the SP before the season's over.
Without a doubt, I think that really goes for any team that's missing one of those top 4 or 5 goalies. I think that's the case for Quad City with Bailey Birkin. I think that's the case for Fayetteville with Jason Pulaski. So if one of those guys comes back, how drastically does it shape the top of the standings with all those teams being in those top 4, 5, or 6 spots? I think it makes a huge difference for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's jump into it. Let's break down each team's weekend the best we can, and I know you'll do a good job. I'll just mumble on nonsense and try to sound like I know what I'm talking about, like I do every week. But people are used to that from me.
You actually cover this league as a whole, though. I just work for one team, so we'll tag team it. We'll be fine.
Yeah, it's hard, man. It's hard. Like it's hard. It's hard to try to watch all these games. And I mean, I've told my 4 listeners I don't watch every single game. I try my hardest. Like Sunday games are easy to watch. But Friday night, Saturday night, if the Bulls are playing, that's where I got to be.
Well, that's where we were so spoiled from last season. Like, obviously, I'm glad that we've got 11 teams instead of 5 this year. But like for me, it's tough to watch games when you're, because last year I wasn't traveling. So this year I'm traveling and I'm calling home games, obviously. So doing everything else within the front office, like there's not as much time to watch other games. But last year, okay, I called my one game. And then the next morning, I can watch the one other game that was played in the SPHL that night because there can't be more than 2 games played with only 5 teams. So it's so easy to watch everything. And now it's harder to watch anything at all because, you've got your team that you're covering. So, it's with 11 teams, it's hard to keep track of everybody.
Yeah, definitely.
There's like some NHL like beat reporter right now that's I cover 32 teams. What are you talking about? So
but you look at a lot of those guys. You watch NHL Network. It's a panel of 3 or 4 people. I mean, so I mean they can divide it up if they want. But
go easy on James. He's by himself, people.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. Give me no. I want an out here. Give me an easy out. No. But so before I keep begging my listeners to give me credit here, so let's talk about Birmingham. Birmingham, you got to see them up close and personal for the first time since earlier in the season, whenever they were really struggling hard, and they've kind of come into their own. They've made some player changes. There's some roster changes. They made some key trades, and things are starting to look a little bit better for them. And they beat Knoxville 7-4 Thursday night. They ended the weekend, 1-1. They played the 2 best teams in the league, or standings wise, I guess. Yeah, best teams. I can say that maybe I'm down to 3 listeners now, but the 2 best teams. And they were able to split it. They put up a good fight against Huntsville, but Knoxville, I mean, the Ice Bears were never in that game. It just never really seemed like. I mean, they would get close, and then Birmingham would have an answer. Donahue was just on a roll the whole weekend. Donahue's the only guy that scored against Huntsville in that 2-1 loss in Huntsville. And it just, but they're 5-5. They'll go and do this, and then they're going to lose to Macon. Not discrediting Macon, but because Macon, Macon's a hit and miss team. Are you going to get the team that lets 13 goals in or whatnot? But it's just, I don't know. What's your take on Birmingham over this past weekend?
Well, we've kind of seen this a lot. This is not just a this season thing. It was a big part of what Birmingham was last year. They like to turn games into a track meet. They like to try to generate odd man rushes. And, I thought the difference of what we saw from Birmingham against Knoxville on Thursday was there were several goals where guys were just doing it themselves. Colton Fletcher made an insane play where he intercepts a saucer pass out of the air, slaps it down in the neutral zone, is trying to skate around Sam Turner, flips the backhand up, beats the blocker of Sammy Bernard, and scores a great goal. And then you got Scott Donahue twice scoring the same way, where he gets around a defenseman. And the first time it's a bad break for Knoxville. It's a bad rotation. So Joey Strada, who's a forward and a smaller forward at that, is now having a man up against Scott Donahue. He's able to get around and score. And then he does it again against Kyler Matthews later in the game. So you had a handful of goals for Birmingham where it was just guys deciding to take over and do it themselves when they had to. And so typically we see these games from Birmingham where there's a lot of goals scored. They're going to give up a lot of shots. They're going to try to limit the quality of those shots. But yeah, you're right. It was a game where Knoxville, and it was so weird too, because it was scoreless after the first, and then Birmingham scores twice, 60 seconds apart within the first minute and a half of the second period. And suddenly Knoxville's playing catch up the rest of the way. They made it 2-1. Birmingham extended it to 3-1. Riley Robertson scores to make it 3-2. Carson Rose gets this weird bounce off the half wall and tees off on it from the high slot just 22 seconds later. So Knoxville seemingly has the momentum and thinks, okay, maybe we could settle down and claw our way back into this game. Nope. Here comes a goal from Carson Rose. Now it's 4-2. Then you give up another goal to Donahue. Now it's 5-2. Timo Feyev gives you a big momentum boost with a goal to make it 5-3 with 30 seconds left in the second period. Then Donahue scores again early in the third. And so Knoxville's playing from behind the entire way. And so for Birmingham, Austin Lotz really did play well. I know anytime you look at, he gave up 4 goals. He gave up 4 goals on 50 shots.
Yeah.
Knoxville really dominated stretches of that game and just couldn't find the net. And then Birmingham ultimately got the goals when they needed to. And so ultimately, I think Birmingham outplayed Knoxville. Knoxville didn't play its best hockey, didn't take advantage of some of the opportunities that it had. They made mental mistakes on defense, but anytime that you think, okay, we're going to get 50 shots on goal, we're going to score 4 times, you don't expect that team to lose, let alone lose by 3 goals. So, Lotz made big saves to keep Birmingham from having that game get out of hand. And so making those big saves early really allowed Birmingham to take control of the game once they got those goals in the second. So I think Birmingham is starting to play with some confidence right now. I think anytime that you have a situation where Colton Fletcher gets traded for Casey Kolzicki, or Kolcheski, I should say, I think anytime you have that situation, a guy like Colton Fletcher is going to be playing with a huge chip on his shoulder the rest of the way. But I think that's the sort of trade that benefits both sides because both guys are benefiting from a change of scenery. Kolcheski's going somewhere where he feels like, hey, this is a team that's in position to start having immediate success. Colton Fletcher's going to a situation where, hey, I have an opportunity to make a new identity for myself. I can take on a bigger role offensively. I can play my style of hockey in a different way. And so it just works out for both sides. But, Austin Lotz, getting him back, especially with the way that Hayden Stewart played for most of January, I think that gives Birmingham a shot to maybe make a run at that last playoff spot and take it away from Evansville.
Yeah, definitely. And you answered one of the questions I was going to ask. I mean, that Kolcheski used to be Kolzicki trade for Fletcher. It seems like a trade, and you don't see it a lot. It seems like a trade that really honestly worked out for both sides. I mean, they're both doing well in their new roles, and you just don't generally see that. Usually there's a loser in this, but in my opinion, I don't think either team lost in this one. And I think both players are striving in their new roles and their new teams.
Well, and I think for Kolcheski, especially in Knoxville, it gives him the opportunity to continue to do what he does best, and that's get chippy around the crease and create a net front presence and be physical. And right now with, Stefan Brucato just now being activated off the IR after 3 weeks off and, not having Andrew Ballant, I think having some guys that are used to being rats around the net, Casey's willing to do that. And for Colton Fletcher, he's a very, finesse type player. He likes to generate a lot of offense. He loves to be in the attacking zone and loves to find ways to push ahead and look for those opportunities to go on the rush. And he made a really skillful play by intercepting that pass in the neutral zone and turning it into a goal. So, he found himself in some positive situations in Birmingham. And so I think that benefits the way that Birmingham likes to play with its offense, using that tempo, using that pace. Whereas Knoxville, I think for Colton Fletcher, it's a little bit more about structure and setting up the pass and trying to find the right setup play and looking for that playmaking type ability where, Colton loves to go and score goals. And so I think it's just benefited both guys. And Casey's blended in well in Knoxville. Colton seems like he's blending in just fine in Birmingham. And so you're right. I think it's one of those rare trades that really does benefit both parties.
Yeah, definitely. And I'm with you. I think Birmingham can make a push for the playoffs, but they're going to have to start stringing together some wins here. They're 5-5 in their last 10, and right now, as it sits, they're 14 points out of that 8th and final playoff spot. Evansville didn't do them any favors over the weekend. They played Vermilion County twice and handled business there. And they do got Evansville coming up on the calendar, and I think they play them 5 times total to close out this season. And I mean, that's going to be crucial games. And I mean, those games can be the 2 points that decide who's going to be there if Birmingham can start stringing together wins. But that's the key is you're going to have to win more than 1 or 2 in a row. You got to do like, a Peoria is doing, or like Knoxville did. You're going to have to swing 10 wins in a row, maybe 7, 6, somewhere. You got to get points. Like early in the season, Birmingham was getting points. They were losing every game, but they were getting points. Every game was going to overtime. Well, that's not the way it is. They're either going to win big or lose big. Well, that's a lie. They lost 2-1 to Huntsville. So, but those games are always a different story. That's a rivalry game.
Well, and it's tough because, we see the SPHL and the schedule is, it's a 1-division league, but it is kind of regionally based. And so for Birmingham, they're playing a lot of games against Pensacola and Huntsville. And that's tough when you have to do that every season. You got to scrap and claw your way out. And when those 3 teams are all playing each other a lot, that means somebody is likely taking the brunt of the losses. And so it was funny getting to talk to David Coons from the front office over there and from Field Pass Hockey, because we were reflecting back on the 2018-19 season when Peoria, which was the last full season we had in the SPHL before COVID, Peoria set the record for the most wins in the regular season with 40, but Birmingham had 39. And, I was kind of talking to David about that, and he was like, well, Peoria kind of had the benefit of playing Quad City. They were a new franchise. They didn't have a lot of success that year. They also got to play Evansville a lot. Evansville was having a tough season that year, where Birmingham's having to play Pensacola and Huntsville. He was like, Birmingham, earned their 39. They had to work for their 39. Yeah. And I think sometimes you kind of see that strength of schedule really play out, where if you have all these regionally based teams, somebody's going to struggle. You look at the state of Illinois right now. Vermilion County's dead last in the league, but you've got Quad City and Peoria up there towards the top. And I'm not trying to discredit what Peoria and Quad City are doing, but yeah, if you're getting to play a lot of games against Evansville and Vermilion County right now, you better be in the top 5 in the league, because it's opportunities to be able to collect points and win games. And so if you're Birmingham, your opportunities are, well, you got to go play Knoxville. Then you have to play Huntsville the following day. So you got back-to-back against 2 of the top 3 teams in the league. That's really, really tough. And so when you get those opportunities against a team like Macon, and again, not trying to discredit any team in the SPHL, because we've seen it throughout the year. Any team can beat any team on a given day. But if you're finally getting a break from Pensacola or Huntsville, you've got to take advantage of it when you get to go play Macon, or you get to go play, maybe a Fayetteville team that before this recent stretch, they were having problems, or you get to go play Roanoke, where before Saturday they had lost 4 straight. So you have to be able to find, if you find a notch in the schedule where you're playing a team that hasn't had its best hockey over the last 2 weeks, you got to find a way to get points in that game.
Yeah, absolutely. That's exactly it. They're gonna have to capitalize on those games against Macon when Macon's struggling. Exactly. I couldn't have said it better myself. So yeah, that's probably enough about Birmingham. Then we can talk about Evansville. We're gonna get them out of the way. We're not gonna miss them like we did last time. I need to go back and listen to that one. I feel like we talked about Evansville.
See, here's the thing. If I'm sure you remember this. I think we actually joked about it because I was having internet connection issues when we did our last episode of the podcast together, and I think it happened every time we talked about Evansville. And it got to the point where in post-production, there was nothing about Evansville that you could use in the podcast.
That might have been it.
You actually made a joke about it. Like, man, I don't think StreamYard wants you to talk about Evansville. Because every time we did the Evansville segment 3 times.
That's right.
And it didn't work. So, to our boy, Tommy P, if you're listening, that we tried to talk about Evansville last time.
Yeah. We're going to get them in now. So Evansville, they're a team that, they started the season off looking really good, and then they just kind of fell off in December, January, and it seems like they're starting to kind of feel their way. They went 2-1 over the weekend. They're another team that's 5-5 in their last 10. They're hanging on to that 8th spot in the standings, but like I said, they're 14 points ahead of the Bulls, so they got a pretty comfortable cushion. But you'd imagine they probably don't want to have to take on a Knoxville or a Huntsville come playoff time, or hell, I mean even Peoria if they were sitting in third. But yeah, so they lost to Quad City to open the weekend up 4-2 at home, and then they played Vermilion County twice. They scored a touchdown against the Bobcats on Saturday night. They beat them 7-0. I mean, it was just a beat down. And then they snuck one in. It was 2-1, much better game on Sunday between the two. We really see that a lot. When you see two teams play back-to-backs, the second game's usually going to be closer. But yeah, I mean, that was Cameron Cook had a great weekend. Coy Prevost, and I'm sorry if I'm saying his name wrong. He's a new guy in my vocabulary of players that I just completely ruined their last names. He had a great weekend, five points for him. He had 4 goals and assists. Cook had 3 goals and an assist. So you got a couple of guys with production, and I think they need, like Austin Plevy, he's starting to step up his game too. And we all know what he's capable of. It seems like Evansville is starting to get things going, but yeah, they're another team that, well, they handled business. Vermilion County is a team like we talked about. You got to beat the Bobcats if you're playing them as often as you are if you're up in that northern portion of the division of the league, and they did. So I don't know. What's your takeaway on Evansville right now?
I think it's a team that's still trying to find its way on offense and still wanting to see a little bit more depth defensively, and that's where I think. Because I've only called 2 games against Evansville this year, but in both games, they kind of played out in similar fashion, tight throughout the first couple of periods, and then Knoxville pulls away in the third. So is it a depth issue, a conditioning issue? And it's really tough to say because they have the skill to be able to compete with these teams. And it's not for a lack of a strength of schedule because, being up in Illinois, they're going to see Quad City and Peoria a lot. Yeah. And I think for a team like Evansville, when you have a guy like Austin Plevy, when you have some skill players that can go out there and get big goals when you need them, it sometimes can make your team a little one-dimensional if you're having to depend on those guys a little bit too frequently. And I think also it's just, at some point, Brian Billett's going to get burned out. The guy's been in the league for this is his 6th pro season, but he's taken a couple of years off in between all that time. And, he's getting a ton of reps. And that's one thing is just you kind of have to wonder, are they able to figure out a second goaltender situation? They had Kai Edmonds for a while, Ryan Edquist. And so there's been a bit of a rotation behind Billett, who's done an excellent job. And he's really started to put his play together here in the last couple of weeks. But how long can he keep that up if you're having to go on some sort of Braden Holtby or Jonathan Quick type Ironman streak in the SPHL, especially when, it's just, you don't have time to have a couple of bad games and then reset. It's best 2 out of 3 in the SPHL playoffs. So you have 2 bad nights, your season's over. And so for Evansville, they're a tough team to figure out because I was kind of telling you this before we went on the air. I don't really have an explanation as to why they're not having more success because I don't see any clear and obvious flaws. But I think offensively, they're just a little flat right now. And so it's a team that's kind of treading water and still trying to figure out, okay, who else besides Austin Plevy is going to score for a team that's a little offensively challenged right now?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, it's interesting. And talking about that goaltender depth, I mean, I think one of the things is where are you going to find one? I mean, that's just a struggle. I mean, that in Knoxville, I mean, you guys have been you had to replace Peretta. I mean, it just seems like all the good goaltenders, like we said, they're going up to the next level. And I mean, who are you going to have that can, maybe play one of these games over the weekend in 3-3? You're not looking for a guy that's going to play, 2 out of the 3. You just need a guy that can maybe play Saturday if you're playing Friday, Saturday, Sunday, or somebody to give your guy a rest, right now. And yeah, I mean, it's tough. It's definitely tough. And I agree. They need to find their offense. They definitely found it, against Vermilion County, but I guess we'll see how they find their offense when they're playing a team other than Vermilion County, because as we know, Vermilion County is just one of those teams that's really struggled to find their own goals and stop them from coming in their net. I mean, one of their goaltenders is phenomenal, but he's playing in the AHL right now. So what are they going to do? But we're not talking about Vermilion County just yet. But so, yeah, I mean, did you have anything else you wanted to talk about there? Or are we ready to go on to
I'm good to move on. I think Evansville, and let's see, part of that is this kind of goes back to the point I was making earlier about that regionally based schedule. So, Peoria has the best season in SPHL history in 2019. What happens? They get swept in the first round. And so when you're spending a lot of time playing against, we got all these wins, but a lot of them were against the same 2 or 3 teams that we're used to playing. And now we've got to match up against somebody else that maybe is a little more confident, has had a little bit more success, because that was during the area of the challenge round. Yeah, and instead of going after the 8 seed, they went after the 5 seed in Roanoke, and Roanoke swept them. Yeah. So, and then meanwhile, you look at Birmingham, a little bit more of a well-rounded schedule. At the very least, they're playing Huntsville and Pensacola, so they're at least battle-tested. They go all the way to the finals and lose to Huntsville. So, I just think sometimes that's why we see the number of upsets that we do in the first round in the SPHL, because it's not this evenly balanced schedule. And we see it in all levels of hockey, but especially in the SPHL is, your seed is not based on region. It's based on where you are in the standings. And so sometimes good teams can feed off of some other franchises that aren't having a successful season. Then they go to the playoffs and, hey, maybe this 7 seed was actually pretty lethal and they've had to, deal with other issues. And so they got hot at the right time. But yeah, I mean, more often than not, the 1 seed doesn't win the President's Cup finals. And I think that regionally based scheduling is a big reason why.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's like you said, I mean, if you're not playing Roanoke a lot or you're not playing one of these other teams a lot, I mean, heck, they might sneak up on you, like you said. So yeah, so let's talk about another team that's kind of up in that northern part of the region there, Fayetteville. They're on a 6-game winning streak. They went 2-0 over the weekend. They're looking good. They looked good to start the season. They kind of struggled a little ways through. It seems like they're starting to feel it, and I think they play Roanoke every single weekend. I say that all the time. It just seems like that's the only team that these two teams just play each other all the time. And Roanoke's got the better of them through most of the month of December and January. Where you see Roanoke pulling out those wins. Well, Fayetteville got it back, and they had a 3-2 on Thursday, 3-1 on Friday, and they just they look like they're starting to feel it, and they're also another one of those teams. They lost Piatrowski, like you said earlier, their goaltender, but they found a way to make what they got work, and they're coming around now. Granted, like I said, this is Roanoke. I mean, these two teams, it's like watching Birmingham and Huntsville. It seems like it's developed into a rivalry, and you're always going to get both teams' best hockey. And yeah, that's about all I really have to say on that one. What do you got to say about Fayetteville?
Well, for a while, you were right. I mean, Roanoke had Fayetteville's number, and you were kind of wondering, man, maybe we should be paying more attention to Roanoke because they've always been so scrappy. I mean, in all 3 games Roanoke's played against Knoxville, you can make the argument that Roanoke's been the better team. Knoxville somehow has 2, an overtime win and a shootout win against them. So I think for Roanoke, you saw them lose all these games in overtime at the start of the season, and then they started to click. And for a while, it looked like Roanoke might have been the hottest team in the SPHL. And now Fayetteville's starting to figure some things out. I think part of it, too, has been getting the acquisition of Brett Moran, their new goaltender. That's a guy that spent 5 years in the OHL. He didn't have the best numbers, and I think he kind of took some heat for that. But he was an NHL draft pick. And so, I kind of remember reading some comments about him like, okay, well, his numbers in the OHL weren't that great. Look, when he was playing for the Flint Firebirds, they were a dumpster fire. They had 2 head coaching changes in the same season. It's like he hasn't always had the best situation surrounding him, but he played at the highest level of junior hockey. I believe he was one of the backup goalies for either the U17 or the U20 Canadian World Junior Championship squad. So, the guy has had success on a bigger level, and he comes in for Fayetteville and he starts putting together some good performances. And that's been a big help for the marksman to kind of help replace Piatrowski there in net. And then also they had all of these guys on injured reserve, and they had a couple of call-ups through November and December. They got a lot of those guys back, so they're healthy again. And the last time I was on this show, you and I talked about Fayetteville. At the time, I called them maybe the second best team in the league behind Huntsville because of what they can do from a structural standpoint offensively. They're starting to find that again. So Fayetteville's starting to get their groove back. And I remember talking to Drew Blevins about 3 weeks ago when the last time Fayetteville came to Knoxville, and he said, like ever since Piatrowski got called up, it just hasn't been the same. And then Fayetteville's got this 3rd period lead against Knoxville. Then they commit some penalties. Knoxville's able to come back. Fayetteville blows the game. Knoxville wins at home. And, it was kind of like another example of what Drew was telling me before we dropped the puck that night. And now ever since then, Fayetteville's gotten things back on track so that, they get Moran, they get some guys back. They're healthy again. Taylor Best, he took a hit in that game, missed maybe a few days. But, ever since then, he's been fine. And so Taylor McCloy, Taylor Best, those guys are all starting to put it together for Fayetteville. And so, sure, they went through a bit of a skid, but you're starting to see the team that you saw back in October and November a little bit.
Yeah, yeah. And the good thing is when they were going through that skid, they were still able to get some more points in the standings. And we know that the middle of the standings has been tight all along. And right now they're sitting in 5th. They're only 1 point behind Quad City, who at one point was the second team in the standings. But I mean, and they're 7 points ahead of Roanoke, who's right below them. And so Fayetteville, they've positioned themselves, for success. And if they can keep this up, and I believe they're playing Roanoke again this week.
They play each other 17 times this year.
Yeah, and so I mean, those two teams are just going to beat the crap out of each other all year long. And if they plan it just right, they can play each other in the first round of the playoffs too.
Let's see if they end up in the 4-5 matchup.
Yeah, imagine that. I mean, I don't know. I mean, you'd almost think one of the teams would just drop a game if they were that close in the points. They're like, no, we're not going to play them one more time in the standings in the second round. I mean, it's just, I mean, you almost feel like there's going to be a real hatred between the two teams at some point. But yeah, I mean, I agree. I think Fayetteville's starting to get things to come together, especially with good goaltending, and they're one of the teams. I said it before, my very first podcast here this year, I said they were going to be the team to go to the finals, and they're the only team that still really got me convinced that they might be able to pull it off, because the other team was Birmingham, and that's the homer in me. But
you picked Birmingham to go to the finals this year?
Yeah, I was going to have – this was before the season, before the first puck dropped on the season.
Right.
I had Birmingham and Fayetteville going. And, yeah, I mean, hey, that's the homer in me. You got to do it, right?
At least as you acknowledge it's the homer pick.
Yeah, exactly. And, I mean, they got to – yeah, that's it. I'm just going to leave it there. I'm just going to leave it there. So.
I'm not trying to knock Birmingham. It's just coming off the season that happened a year ago, and just – to bounce back and go from, all right, dead last to go to the finals. I mean, I guess it could happen, but man.
Yeah, well, yeah. And the thing about the SPHL too is none of these teams really ever stay the same. I mean, Mike Davis is about the only guy left on the team from last year besides Austin Law, the goaltenders. And somebody's going to get mad at me at the next Bulls game. They're going to be like, no, he was here and he was here too. But those are the three names.
What about Stewie?
Yeah. I mean, and so I don't know. It was just, like I said, it was the homer in me, but we're not going to talk about that anymore.
Well, actually, hey, can I actually napalm the segment for a sec?
Absolutely.
Okay, so a funny Hayden Stewart story, because I got to share this with you from when he was playing in Knoxville. So Stewie went to Cornell, right?
Yeah.
And sometimes we forget that we have a handful of guys that are that went to Ivy League schools. And so Hayden Stewart's in his first season in Knoxville. I'm interviewing Jeff Carr before a game, and I decide, it's March. So I'm hearing about the March Madness bracket challenge that the team had decided to do together. So I asked Jeff about it, like how he's doing it and everything. And he goes, well, I'm not doing too great. My bracket's already pretty much busted. But my favorite part about this whole bracket challenge is, the fact that Stewie's in dead last, which is great because he's a Cornell guy. So Stewie thinks he's so smart, but I don't know why he didn't go to a better college to help him pick brackets. Instead, he's here playing hockey for us. So just ripping on the Ivy League guy for being dead last in the bracket challenge. I asked Hayden about it. He was like, man, I don't know. So,
what did he have? Cornell going to the final
probably.
Four? Yeah, sometimes you just gotta be a homer. I mean, that's all there is to it. so
yeah, Hayden Stewart, great goalie, but don't trust him to win your bracket pool at the office.
Yeah, don't take his college basketball advice. So that's great. That's awesome. That's a good one. So that's definitely a good one. So all right, let's jump on to next team up. I got is Huntsville. So Huntsville, team that's been struggling lately. They've had goaltending issues. They're missing goaltenders, obviously, and it's just the whole team really hasn't been all there at one point. And but they bounced back this weekend. They got Knoxville 5-3. They got Birmingham 2-1. They're on a 3-game win streak. So the wheels are rolling, and they took number one back, and they took it back by playing number one, which is always an exciting way to see things go. And I think the battle between Knoxville and Huntsville throughout the rest of the year is going to be great. I don't know how many more times do these two teams face each other?
They play each other one more time, and it's going to be in Knoxville. So yeah, they've met 3 times in Huntsville. They've played twice in Knoxville. They've got one more at the Coliseum coming up.
Yeah, so I mean that's great. I think that's a good battle right there. I mean that might be the two teams that are actually playing in the finals. Well, yeah, they can work out that way as long as they stay 1-2. But yeah, I don't know what's your take on Huntsville. I mean, where do you think they're headed from here?
So the thing with Huntsville is that, there are just certain teams that they don't match up well against. They find ways to win. I was talking to Mitch Stewart from Roanoke about this because they recently had a win over Huntsville. And he was talking about, he's like, I feel like we match up really well against Huntsville. Like, even if we lose to them, it's always competitive. That's kind of been the way with Knoxville as well. I mean, lately, you probably feel that way with Birmingham, the way that they've matched up. Huntsville doesn't like to be very physical, but there's a few things that they do exceptionally well that if you just give them a sliver, if the door's cracked open at all, they'll eventually keep knocking until they bust it wide open. Because they're not really this team that's dominating everybody by scoring 6 or 7 goals a game anymore. They're not doing that. But what happened on Friday night at the Knoxville Civic Coliseum, Knoxville comes out, they get a shorthanded goal. And then, so Tyler Piatrowski goes and he makes a play on his own. He forces a takeaway on the half wall, skates into the corner. He finds Nutkovich on the back door, turns into a goal. Okay, then Jason Price goes out and gets his second goal of the night off a rebound. All right, so what's happening now? So Kyle Clark takes a blue line turnover, turns it into a breakaway and scores. Like, if you make a small mistake against Huntsville, and I think Huntsville's the best breakaway team in the SPHL. They love to look for the rush. And that was one of the keys to the game that I asked Jeff Carr about right before we went on the ice. And he said, do not let Huntsville sniff odd man rushes. And so Sam Turner makes a blind feed on the blue line. Kyle Clark eats it up, takes it down the length of the ice and buries it past Evan Moyes. And man, I don't know, like, what, obviously they don't keep this stat, but if there was like a breakaway percentage during the regular season for teams, I guarantee you Huntsville will be towards the top of the list. Because if you give one of their skaters in space, and that's what makes them so tough to beat in the shootout, is that their skaters are just so good in space. And Knoxville for the most part dominated that game. They had the momentum. They were up 2-1 after the first. And then, they played 4 poor minutes in the second period, allowed Huntsville to take the lead back. Knoxville gets a power play goal to tie the game in the third. And Huntsville had 1 shot on goal through the first 16 plus minutes of the third period. 1 shot on goal. And then, there's kind of a soft hooking call against Kyler Matthews. And I'm thinking, that's the sort of spark that a team like Huntsville needs. Is they haven't been able to do anything offensively since halfway through the second period. They were just given a power play, their first of the third. It's a tie game late. And of course, now the focus reshifts because you've got Piatrowski, Nutkovich, Rob Dara, Jacob Barber, Dylan Riley, I think, has been a great addition for them lately, especially with Bauer Nordecker still being up in the ECHL. And so you've got all these great shooters and all these great players that are able, contribute offensively, and all they need is 1 shot on the power play for Rob Dara to score the go-ahead, and then Barber gets the empty netter late. But that's the thing, is Huntsville was outshot 32-18 and dominated for the entire third period, but that's all they need. They're the type of team where, they say, we don't need that many scoring chances to beat you because we're so confident in our shooters that, and then Matthew Newcomb has stepped up in the absence of a couple of these guys. They've been riding Zane Steves with Hunter Vorva not being available for whatever reason and Max Milosic being called up. So that's what makes Huntsville so lethal, is that, they're not this invincible team, but they are so opportunistic. That's the type of team they are, that they can find ways to pull out close games that even if they're not playing their best hockey, they'll find a way to beat really good opponents.
Yeah. And you mentioned on Piatrowski. I mean, I don't think that man gets enough credit. It just seems like he's got the big plays. I've heard people joke, well, it's so small nobody can see him. That's why he's making these. But that's not it. He's got very good hockey vision, in my opinion, and he just sees where something's going to develop and he puts himself in the right place and he makes it happen, whether he's the one getting the goal, whether he's the one dishing off the pass, like you said, to Dara. I mean, I don't think he gets quite enough credit from people around the league for what he's able to accomplish out there, and it might be overshadowed by these guys that are scoring all the time like Barber and whatnot. But yeah, I mean, Huntsville, yeah, you nailed it. They're just the most opportunistic team, and if you don't want to break away against them because they're gonna beat you. I would like to see that stat. There's got to be somebody out there out of my 4 listeners that's really good at math that can go back, watch all these games, count all the breakaways, and do the math for us, and then send it to me on Twitter or whatever.
I mean, I was talking to Anthony McVeigh, and because Huntsville and Knoxville have played 5 times. Huntsville's won 3 of the games. And honestly, 2 of those games, I felt like Huntsville wasn't the better team on the ice. And it's not me trying to blow up Knoxville. It's just the reality of how I saw that game playing out. And, Anthony was telling me, Huntsville just gets unbelievable puck luck, especially in their own barn. Now, I thought really the one game where they outplayed, and honestly, 2 of the games they've outplayed Knoxville, and Knoxville won one of those games. And I guess that's just part of the rivalry. But on Halloween, when they came to Knoxville, they beat Knoxville 2-0. Knoxville had 3 shots that hit the post. Now, Milošić had a heck of a game. He had 2 really big point-blank saves off of one-timers, and so he kind of stole that game away for Huntsville. But when Huntsville beat Knoxville in a shootout back on November 10th, Knoxville dominated the game. They were more physical. They took the lead in the third period, and then Nordecker gets this shot from the right dot that splits the pads of Jimmy Parita, which I don't know if I've ever seen Parita give up a goal like that. It was just such a bizarre way for Huntsville to tie that game with 5 minutes left to go because there's no vision. He's coming in on the rush one-on-one, and Parita's not being screened. And I don't remember it being a particularly hard shot. I guess Parita was just thinking Nordecker was going to go high. And, earlier in the second period, like right before the break, Huntsville tied the game with, a shot by Dominic Procopio. And I'm pretty sure that's still his only goal of the season from the end line, like an insane corner where it bounces off the shoulder of Christian Stead, and that tied the game at 4. And so Stead gets pulled, Parita goes in. That's the only goal that Parita gives up in that entire game. And then Huntsville wins in a shootout. So there have just been some games this season for Huntsville that I've seen where, they don't necessarily, they're not the better team for all 60 minutes, but if you give them like a different, 2 minutes each period, they are going to make you pay for it so hard, especially on special teams.
Yeah, definitely. They got it. I think the best way, and I mean, even like you said, Knoxville, they were more physical. I think that's the key to being able to beat them. But the one thing you give up whenever you try to get really physical is you might leave an open man, somewhere headed towards the neutral zone. And then if you screw up, that's a goal in the back of your net. So yeah. I don't know. I really enjoy watching the Huntsville-Knoxville games because they always seem to be good. And then they play Birmingham. I really enjoy those games too. The in-state rivalry is great. And that game, Birmingham played them close and they just had a really good second period is what Huntsville had. They put up their 2 goals in the second period. And then Donahue was the lone goal for the Bulls. And it just, not enough. The Bulls just didn't have enough left in the tank to close that one out. And Knoxville just proved to be the better team once again. And the Huntsville fans still get bragging rights. And I still get to hear all the little brother Bulls jokes all over the place, which is so old and worn out. And I don't know. I mean, I guess if you're really a diehard and live and die by your team, it might be an insult, but to me, it just, I don't know. It seems like every level of sports uses that little brother thing. And to me, I'm just like, I don't know. That's kind of worn out. I mean, that's what living in Alabama, that's what everybody says Auburn is, little brother to Alabama. And
yep.
I don't know. Is Vanderbilt little brother to Tennessee?
Yes. 100%.
It's just, and yeah, I don't know. I get tired of that one. Come up with some fresh stuff, Huntsville. No more little brother crap. But anyway,
James' words, not mine.
Yeah.
I'm just here. I said a lot of really nice things about Huntsville. I'm just going to leave it at that.
Yeah, exactly. I'll take the heat on that one. But so let's move on to Knoxville. Let's talk about them next. We've talked about everybody they've played except Roanoke, but the 3-game skid over the weekend. Not exactly what the team going into the weekend being number 1 wanted to do, obviously. And like I said earlier, I don't feel, and we don't have to rehash the whole Birmingham Knoxville game, but I don't feel like they really were in that game. It almost seemed like they weren't ready to play. I don't know. And we talked that night, and it's obviously not. They're professionals. They're ready to play, but that's a lame excuse that you hear a lot of guys not use. But and then the Huntsville game, and then Roanoke. That's the one I'm really interested in there. So Roanoke came off of 2 losses. And then Roanoke handled Knoxville 5-1. That's the game I want you to talk about the most with Knoxville over the weekend, because we've already talked about the other ones.
Yeah, again, I think it was, with Birmingham, I think it was a matter of just getting outplayed for certain stretches of the game and then not being able to slow down the offense when Birmingham started to go up tempo, and unable to avoid the quick responses that Birmingham had against Huntsville. The mistakes in the second period ultimately bit you. I thought Knoxville was the better team. I thought they outplayed Huntsville in the third period. And obviously a lot of people aren't happy with the call there towards the end of the third, but I thought there were some ticky-tack penalties called against Knoxville. And I think, you give Huntsville 5 power plays because it's easy to look at it and say, okay, well, Knoxville killed off the first 4 penalties. Why didn't they kill off the 5th one? You give Huntsville an opportunity to break a 3-3 tie in the final 3 minutes of the third period of a game like that. You give them a power play, they're going to take advantage of it. So I think ultimately it was just you had a couple of unfortunate bounces. I think the big mistakes that you made in the second period really cost you the game. And then against Roanoke, I thought Knoxville did a really good job weathering the storm because they were on the penalty kill 3 times. And so they were outshot 15-9 in the first period. It was still scoreless. Knoxville came back and woke up in the second. They outshot Roanoke 23-12 in the second period alone. And it was kind of a couple of just bad bounces and miscues. So Riley Robertson, instead of looking for a simple breakout pass up the wing, tries to go for this Hail Mary pass to the neutral zone. Jeff Jones picks it off at the blue line. So he keeps it in. And instead of Knoxville breaking out, now Roanoke's on a 3-on-1. And it results in CJ Stubbs being able to tee off right in front of the crease for an easy goal. Christian Stead doesn't have a chance. Knoxville responds 20 seconds later. A great pass by McVeigh sets up a good goal for Jared Nash. But then with 17 seconds left to go in the period, Roanoke gets a shot from the point by Travis Armstrong. There's a little bit of traffic towards the crease, but Stead appears to make the save. Like he gets the pad on it, seems like he's got the angle on it. The puck takes this awkward pop-up into the air, spins over his left shoulder and goes into the net. And so now all this momentum is going straight into the third period for Roanoke. Knoxville's trying to press. Knoxville's trying to get that game-tying goal. A poor angle leads to a 3-on-2. Jesse Anderson's taking it in between the circles. Christian Stead makes a good poke check. Puck bounces off of Anderson, goes past Stead into the net. Now it's 3-on-1, and Knoxville's pressing the rest of the way. So, I didn't think the game was as lopsided as, the 5-1 score would indicate, because Roanoke added 2 power play goals in the final 2 minutes of the game with Roanoke trying to press, or with Knoxville trying to press. But I will say, when it was 3-1 and Christian Stead was pulled with about 3 minutes to go, Roanoke took the puck into the zone and couldn't score on the empty net, because you've got 3 different guys for Knoxville just diving and flying in front of the net trying to keep it out. If you go back and watch the last few minutes of that Roanoke game, it was something that somebody in the front office pointed out for our staff meeting Monday morning was, people can be frustrated that we have lost 3 in a row and 4 of 5. You got to appreciate the heart. You're down by 2. You can't find a way to beat Austin Rodebush, because Knoxville put up over 40 shots on him, only had 1 goal. And here we've got guys going out there diving in front of an empty net when, Roanoke would essentially just be sealing the deal on what already appears to be in doubt for Knoxville. And so you still have the effort out there. And I think it's been a matter of Knoxville hasn't had great bounces. It's had a little bit of unfortunate luck, but the issues are there that need to be corrected. Knoxville hasn't been as solid defensively. It's not all on goaltending. Knoxville's got to be better on the breakouts. They've got to avoid neutral zone turnovers. They've got to avoid allowing odd man rushes, because that's ultimately how they've been beat this year. Turning the puck over in the neutral zone, turning the puck over in their own zone. Those are the things that killed Knoxville towards the end of last season that ultimately cost them a shot at a President's Cup. So I think it's more internal for Knoxville than it's been, because I know I'm talking about, bad bounces and, tough calls and stuff like that. It's ultimately not officiating. It's ultimately not just bad bounces. Like those things haven't helped. And, maybe Knoxville has a win over Huntsville if those things are a little bit different. But even in some of these wins lately, it's been, breakouts have to be better. Entering the zone has to be easier. Knoxville outshot all 3 of their opponents this weekend. And in all 3 games, they were either tied or leading going into the second period. So it's not like Knoxville's getting off to bad starts. It's not like Knoxville is just getting dominated from the first period onward. Knoxville, after 20 minutes is like, all right, this game is still up for grabs. It's still anybody's game. Knoxville arguably is in control of these games, and it's just not finishing well. So Knoxville's got to be better in the third period. That's what made them so good throughout the course of the first 30 games of the season. So better in the third period, better defensively. Having Stefan Brucato come back off the IR is going to be huge. And so that's obviously one thing getting back. Christian Stead came back for that Roanoke game. He didn't get in until late Friday night. So he gets in late Friday night, hops on a bus at 9 a.m, goes to Roanoke. And I know these guys are used to that, but I don't think that's the the typical performance you're going to see from Stead, but getting one of your top 2 goalies back from the start of the year after having to go for about 3 weeks without having either of those guys with you, that's going to change. So Brucato and Stead both being back, I think will help Knoxville, but this is a huge game coming up on Thursday against Peoria.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And then another thing I noticed with Knoxville is the power play. The power play, I think it went 1 for 11 over the weekend. And it just seems like that might be an area that they're going to want to try to start capitalizing on, because I know Birmingham, who has just had a horrible penalty kill, they shut him 0 for 4. And then I think Roanoke was also 0 for 4 against Roanoke. And I don't know. I think if they can start finding some more work there in the special teams too, I feel like that might go a long way. But yeah, getting the goaltender back, and then I know it's not official yet by any means, but I know I seen the other day that Ballant was released by the Indy Fuel. I'm sure there's still waivers that he's got to clear. There's no official announcement that he's coming back to Knoxville, but if that does happen, that'll be another huge addition to the Ice Bears. So we'll see. I think I don't think there's anything to worry about for the Ice Bears fans that listen to this podcast, which I don't know why they would. They can just listen to your podcast. It's way better. But I don't think there's anything to worry about in Knoxville by losing 3. I mean, Knoxville played. I like you said, I do think Knoxville outplays a lot of guys. They just don't finish. They don't close games out. So I see that as you bring it up.
Well, I think if we had said, hey, when we get to the second week of February, Knoxville is going to be 26-7-3 and be second in the SPHL standings, I think a lot of fans would be happy about that. I think a lot of Knoxville fans would be like, oh, that sounds like a really solid stretch. But when you look at Knoxville going on a run where, okay, they lost in the shootout to Huntsville on November 10th, then they won 8 straight, then they dropped 2 to Peoria, then they won 8 straight after that, then they lost to Macon and won their next 4 before losing to Quad City. So that's a stretch of 20 wins in 23 games with only 1 regulation loss. So, when you're used to that type of consistency and success, losing 4 out of 5 games is going to feel problematic. What's especially going to feel problematic is that before last Sunday at the end of January, Knoxville hadn't lost a game by more than 2 goals all year. So they had been in every single game that they had played. And now they've lost 4 out of 5 games, with 3 of the games being by 3 goals or more. So, you've got empty net goals and situations like that kind of lead to that sort of stuff. But, Knoxville had been the number 1 defensive team in the league for the better part of 2.5 months. And now they've kind of dropped to 3rd in goals allowed per game just because they've given up 17 goals in their last 3 games. And that's something that's problematic. All 4 of those losses, they gave up 5 goals or more. So yeah. It's this huge mix, and I know people want to point fingers at goaltending. Say, look, it's goaltending, it's defense, it's special teams. Knoxville's taking more penalties. The penalty kill has not been as strong as it was the first 3 months of the year, and so those are the things that are going to start to slow you down a little bit, because that's Knoxville's identity. Is if we don't take penalties very often, we stay out of the box, and when we're in the box, we're not giving up power play goals, or we're taking away opportunities from the slot. We're not giving up odd man rushes. Well, Knoxville's been doing all of those things in the last 2 weeks, and that's why it's been a little bit tougher. And I know we've talked about like Andrew Ballant, Stefan Brucato. Obviously, you want to have those forwards back. JB Baker did not play this past weekend. That's obviously not ideal for Knoxville either. The hope is that he's going to be available this upcoming weekend for Peoria and Pensacola. Hypothetically, again, I have not heard anything. I asked Jeff Carr Monday morning, is there any update on Andrew Ballant with him being released by Indy? He said no. So in a hypothetical situation, if Brucato, Ballant, and Baker are all back this weekend, then yeah, that definitely changes what Knoxville is as a team. But I also think, something that can't be overstated, losing Dean Moore and Alex Palmerville during the second half of January, that doesn't help Knoxville defensively, because those guys are really simple defensemen that don't do anything flashy. And so you don't talk about them a whole lot because they're not showing up on the stat sheet, but they don't make mistakes. When they're out there, especially like the chemistry that Moore has with Sam Turner and Alex Palmerville being out there on the ice, whoever you put him out there with at different times, it's been different defensemen, but those guys mesh so well together out there on the ice. They just don't make mistakes. And so you're not seeing odd man rushes when they're usually out there. And so it's, and this is stuff that every team's gone through. So I don't want to make it sound like Knoxville's going through anything different, but that's probably what I would point to, is the fact that Knoxville suffered a little bit defensively because they've been a little bit thinner on the blue line with two of their more steady defensemen being up in the ECHL right now.
Yeah, definitely. So yeah, like I said, I mean, I think maybe the people that are kind of worried here, that's the Alabama Crimson Tide syndrome.
Yeah.
Just if you lose one game, it's not the end of the world.
I mean, when Knoxville had their last championship in 2015, I think they had multiple 3-game losing skids, like in the final month of the regular season. I mean, they were dropping it. And I think Huntsville and Fayetteville were the two teams that didn't make the President's Cup playoffs that year. But I mean, they had like dropped a game to Fayetteville, who like finished in 7th that year. And I remember like fans being really frustrated about that. Like they were just blowing third period leads. I remember on Star Wars night, we were up 3-1 in the third period and they gave up 3 unanswered goals to the River Kings. So, they were just, trouble closing out, stuff like that. And everybody's freaking out going to the postseason. They figured it out. So, I was talking to Dino Balsamo before the Roanoke game. He said, look, it's obviously not ideal. We don't like losing games, but you'd rather get this out of the way in February than do it in April. So
Absolutely.
A lot of hockey left to be played. 2 weeks ago, I don't think anybody was really looking at Fayetteville as being a legitimate cup contender because of the recent struggles. Now they've won 6 straight games. Roanoke was the hottest team in the league. They've lost 4 of their last 5. So it's just different depending on what time of the year you're in.
Yeah, absolutely. And like you said, losing them in February, that's a great idea. You'd rather do that than April.
Ideally, you'd rather just go 56-0 and then sweep the playoffs. But
absolutely. I mean, I don't know why they're not doing that, but whatever. A bunch of losers. No. So all right, let's move on from Knoxville and let's go to Macon. I talk about how Birmingham is an up and down team. Macon might be the most streaky team, up and down, maybe not streaky. That means they'd have to string together the same, wins or losses. But I mean, they're just up and down. I mean, one week they're letting 13 goals in, and then the next day they're beating Birmingham 6-1. I mean, this team, they struggled again this weekend. They're on a 2-game losing streak from this weekend. They played Pensacola both times, 5-3 loss. And they were up 3-1 in that first game early in the second period, and they just couldn't hang on. And then they got the shootout, so they did get a point out of the weekend. So and I mean, every point matters. I don't know. I don't know that Macon can make a run for the playoffs. I just don't see that with that team like you do with a team like Birmingham. But getting that point does help. But Devin Brink, he tied that one up with under a minute to go in that Saturday. Yeah, I don't got the day on there. But anyways, he tied it up, and that's what ended up ultimately sending it into overtime and the shootout. And Macon's not, they lost to Roanoke, what was it, 10-1 after they lost to Pensacola 13-5 or 6 or 100. I don't know. There was a million goals in that game. I remembered it a few weeks ago. I dumped that out of my brain. But yeah, I mean, I don't know. I do not honestly know what to make of this Macon team. I mean, I've seen them play Birmingham a lot because it's another one of the teams the Bulls face a lot. And it seems like every time they play Birmingham, they're winning. It almost seems like it's always a good game, but then you see them go and play some of these other games and they're getting blown out. I don't know. I mean, what do you take of Birmingham? What's your take on them?
Well, I saw them play in back-to-back games back in mid-January, and it was a pair of overtime games. And so Knoxville, had to fight them off and beat them for, I guess it was a Friday night. And then the following night, Knoxville actually blew a 2-goal lead and then blew a late lead in the third period and ended up losing that game in overtime. And so I think even when Macon's having success, those were a pair of 6-5 games. And so even with Macon, getting a 3 out of 4 points against Knoxville at the time, they still gave up 11 goals in 2 games. So then you follow that up with giving up 13 against Pensacola, giving up 10 against Roanoke. So, defensively, I think Macon's a little bit weaker on the back check. And I think Cody Rogers has been a good addition for them back there this year because he can be steady. He's willing to contribute offensively. He's not afraid to let the puck fly from the point, but that's kind of having conversations with some other people from the organization. It's just like, I think it's about the back check. It's getting back, understanding, how to see the rush coming, and it's giving up a ton of shots. And so even if it's not a matter of preventing the rush, are you able to get in the shooting lanes? Do you have active sticks? Little things that can maybe save your goalie from having to stop a few pucks here and there, because if you're giving up a ton of shots every game, your goalie can have a solid save percentage, but it's not going to be very strong. And that's the thing with Dylan Kelly is he's actually not in save percentage in the SPHL, but he's not in that conversation for the goals against average because he's having to face so many shots per game. So I think it's just a matter of being able to control puck possession a little bit more, winning battles in the neutral zone, winning wall battles, and being able to back check. So that way you're not having to chase in your own zone so much, and your goalies aren't having to do as much work. So, Macon has shown that on a given night, it's got some guys that are talented enough to go make plays. But I think overall, just they don't have the depth to be able to hang with some of these teams. And yeah, as far as the playoff push, like 21 points out of a playoff spot with about 20 games to go, I would think it's too little too late, because at that point, you don't just need wins. You need to be able to win consistently. You also need Evansville to just bottom out. And I don't think you're going to have all three of those things happen over the last 2 months of the year.
Yeah, that's just rough. But Macon is one of those teams that can play spoiler to an Evansville and a Birmingham. I don't know. I should probably look at the schedule.
And I think they would take pride in that. I think if they, I don't know what the schedule is, but if they're getting opportunities against Evansville and Birmingham, or if they have a chance to, take on Huntsville or Peoria or Knoxville late in the season, where it's like, oh, hey, we could prevent them from getting the number 1 seed, something like that. Anything like that, I think, they'll use as motivation, because they've kind of shown on a given night, if they're playing against a really good team, where they show out. And I think, teams that aren't having as much success in the standings want to do that. I think they want to be able to show, look, guys, we're not, because Macon's obviously they've had some tough losses. I mean, Knoxville beat them 9-0 back in November. So it's not just this recent stretch. They've had some games where they've given up a ton of goals. I think for a team like that, anytime you're a team like that, whether it's Birmingham, Evansville, Vermilion County, Macon, you're thinking, you know what, let's go out and just give these guys a fight. And so on a given night, you can do that. Can you do it consistently for 3 games in 3 days? That's the mark of a playoff team, is when you can start showing that sort of consistency.
Yeah. It's crazy to think this is a completely different Macon team. I mean, player-wise, too, than what we've seen last year that was, just tearing through the league and then went to the finals. I mean, granted, it was a 5-team league, but Macon looked good last year. And this year, it's a completely 100% different team. It's tough for Macon fans. I know that. And, but yeah, I mean, I think Macon might be one of those teams that can screw somebody's standings up and change who's going to play who in the playoffs. They're not going to make it probably, but yeah, they might make the 3 and 4 team look different, or end up giving Knoxville a 1 seed because they beat a Huntsville. Yeah. I mean, they're that kind of team that on one night they can show up and show out. So yeah, let's move on to the team they played over the weekend. It was Pensacola. We kind of already talked a little bit about the games, but Pensacola's on a 3-game point streak. Pensacola is one of those quiet teams to me in that league. They just kind of keep on doing the right things. They're staying there in the middle of the standings. They're winning games when they should be, and which, I mean, I guess that's a stupid thing. I say that too much. You should win every game. That's what you should be doing if you're an athlete, right? But yeah, I mean, it seems like they're getting production from different guys. They got a 4-point weekend from Dylan Caraba. Probably screwed that up.
No, you got it.
All right. And then Wayland Parish, who you see his name pop up a lot. He had a 3-point weekend, 2 goals and an assist. And it just, Pensacola is just, I don't know. They tend to, they played Huntsville almost every single game to start the season, and they were losing all those games. But I feel like if they're going to go and play Huntsville, because they're going to play them again, that it's a different team. And Pensacola is one of those teams that just, to me, I really think they're quietly moving through the league, and maybe not the teams, but fans might be sleeping on them.
I think, again, it goes back to how the schedule can shape up the standings a little bit, where maybe a team has played fewer games, or a team has to play one team so many times. And that's the sort of thing that can make Pensacola really dangerous, because they have to play Huntsville so much. And if Huntsville's legitimately a top 2, top 3, maybe the best team in the SPHL, well, then, yeah, it makes sense that Pensacola is going to take some losses there. They're also going to be really competitive in some of those games. So for the Ice Flyers, I do think that they're dangerous. This is what we see from them often is, okay, maybe they're a little quiet. Then they're going to start making some roster moves, get some guys back from the coast. And that was the big thing for them last year, is when they got Jake Kupski back, they were a totally different team. And that's what I kind of was thinking the whole thing. It's like, if Pensacola gets Kupski back, they are going to be a sleeping giant, and they're going to be incredibly dangerous. And then what happened right before the playoffs? They got Kupski back, and they swept the teams that had been in the top 2 the entire season in Knoxville and Macon. So I think you could potentially see that again. I think they're still trying to figure out their goaltender situation a little bit. And so not putting up the best numbers in that category. And so, maybe just the attrition that they suffered from last year to this year, because last year's squad had a few players that were still playing for them when it was an all SPHL year the year before. And then last year, we kind of call it the ECHL year because you had all this ECHL talent that had filtered down. Well, they still had some guys that were playing for them during the previous SPHL season. And so now a lot of those guys are missing. Like Eddie Matsushima's not there. And so some guys like that, when you're missing some of those key pieces that helped you be successful the year before, it seems like they're still trying to adjust to that a little bit. They're still really competitive, still really scrappy. Like, honestly, you can make a case for the top 7 teams in the league to go on some sort of run. But what makes Pensacola dangerous is, okay, if they're playing in a playoff series that's not against Huntsville, now they're dangerous because they're not just going to lose to Huntsville. So it goes back to where you fall in line in seeding, what's your scheduling been like. But I think Pensacola is a team that if it gets hot, does it shape up the standings a little bit? And they just haven't been able to consistently produce yet. And if that light doesn't turn on, then maybe it will be a quiet season for the Ice Flyers, which is weird to say because that's never really the case. But so far this year, like because they also haven't gone on like some sort of dangerous streak yet. There's still time for them to do that. But like Roanoke's gone on a streak. Fayetteville's gone on a streak. Quad City, Knoxville, Peoria, Huntsville. All of those other teams have gone on some sort of monster streak at some point during the season. Pensacola hasn't really had theirs yet. And so is that going to happen or not? Like, we'll have to wait and see. I don't know. Maybe it's their turn. Maybe it's a rotation. But that's kind of what we're waiting on with Pensacola is they just haven't really emerged yet. And so you're kind of asking yourself, is there still a potential that they can reach? Or is this just what Pensacola is? So I don't know. Well, I'm going to see them again this weekend. So I guess we'll find out a little bit more. But that's kind of what we've seen from Pensacola so far.
Yeah, definitely. And I mean, they're 1 point. They're sitting in 7th. They're 1 point out of 6th, but they're only 9 points out of 4th. So if they go on a streak, I mean that might be what they're looking for. I mean, that's how close the standings are in the middle too. Any team goes on something and the standings will get shook up like that. But Pensacola's another team. They can score a lot of goals. They've scored as many goals this year as Quad City has. And so, I mean, we'll see. We'll see if they can put together that streak. They're on a 3-game point streak right now, but not a win streak. So we'll move on. Next up, Peoria. Peoria has been on one of those streaks. They're actually on an 11-game point streak. They just lost their 10-game win streak, playing Quad City, which is the team they play all the time whenever they're not playing Vermilion County. Other than that, they don't play anybody else. But they beat Vermilion County 5-1. They played extra time in both games against Quad City. They won one in overtime 2-1, and then they lost this last one on Sunday 3-2 against Quad City, and that was the one that ended their win streak. But Peoria has really turned it up here as the season gets going, and I mean, Hagaman has been playing the way everybody knows Hagaman to play, and just a lot of these additions. They got Godbout, who's another one of those players you don't really hear about a lot, but you always see him on the score sheet. J.M. Piatrowski, he's making all kinds of changes he's making all kinds of noise down there. They're getting scoring from all their lines. This is a team that can score a lot of goals, but how much do we put into that whenever they're scoring a lot of these goals against a team like Vermilion County?
And that's the thing. The 10-game win streak's impressive, but I think 5 of those wins came against the Bobcats. And I think that's sort of where you kind of wonder, okay, how good are they? And so when Knoxville went there in December, Knoxville had third period leads in both games and lost both games. They chased Eric Levine in that first game on that Friday night. And then, they opted to keep him in there, but they still put up 4 goals on him. So I think Peoria is a team that, I think the last time they played Huntsville, they split a 2-game weekend against the Havoc. So they've shown that they can beat the good teams. I think Peoria is a really good team. And right now, I think Alec Hagaman is probably going to end up with the Kevin Swider scoring award and the league MVP. And you could think, well, what about all these guys from Huntsville? The thing is that any one of those guys from Huntsville can go on a 3-game scoring drought, and it's not going to matter because Huntsville's still going to win because they have everybody else that they're loaded with. I don't know if there's a single player. And here's the thing. I know league-wide, a lot of people hate Alec Hagaman. I know a lot of opposing fan bases can't stand the guy, the turtle jokes, everything. Here's the thing about Alec Hagaman. And again, this is coming from a guy that works for the Knoxville Ice Bears. So far, there has not been a single player in the entire Southern Professional Hockey League that has been more valuable to the success of his own team than Alec Hagaman. The guy has totally turned it on. And the thing is, back in like December, he wasn't really on the radar for like this high offensive campaign, and suddenly he turned it on. Like he's had multiple hat tricks. Yeah. He had a phenomenal December. He's turned his season around. He's averaging like 1.6 points per game. And yeah, it's tough to keep that streak up. But if he keeps producing for Peoria, even if it comes against Vermilion County, like there's nobody from Huntsville that's going to be able to consistently keep up with him because they kind of work on a rotation. Like Jacob Barber will, he was the fastest player to 20 goals, and then he hasn't really scored as much in the last month. Like he'll get a couple of assists here and there. Cy Nutkovich, like he's going to get some assists here and there, and then he won't do anything for 3 games. And it's not because he's having bad games, but it's because teams are going to key in on him. And then Piacentini's going to make a splash. And then it's going to be Matthew Newcomb, and it just crazy games like that. But Peoria is also showing that they can win the low scoring games too, as evidenced by this past weekend. So, they don't need to go out and score 5 or 6 goals in order to beat a team, but it's kind of like Huntsville. They can take advantage of your mistakes. If you don't have a good back check, they're going to destroy you in your own zone. If you do not clear the puck, and if you're not back checking to be able to get the puck out of your own zone, they're going to steal it from you, and they're going to score goals, and they're going to bite you. And then if you get them into overtime, you've got to be careful because they play really, really well once they get past regulation. So, I know we've seen this from Peoria before in the regular season. I know there's a lot of jokes about, well, the first round playoff and, it's all that stuff, or they can't do it in the finals. Here's the thing. And again, like I throw what happens in the past out the window when it comes to this sort of stuff. But right now, I think Peoria might actually be your best bet to lock up that number 1 seed if Huntsville and Knoxville don't start straightening things out. Because Knoxville and Huntsville are both 5-4-1 in their last 10 games. Yeah. And so both of that has to turn around quickly, because with what Peoria is doing right now, sure, they get to play Vermilion County 15 times. And they get to play Evansville 8 times. So yeah, 23 games are against 2 of the worst 4 teams in the SPHL. But they're taking advantage of that. And Huntsville and Knoxville aren't. Like Knoxville in the past month has lost games to Macon and Birmingham. Huntsville has lost to Birmingham. So, and no disrespect to those teams again, but we talk about taking advantage to separate yourself for the number 1 seed. Peoria did lose to Vermilion County a couple of months ago, but since then they're not letting that happen again. So, any team, anytime that you look at any team in the SPHL and they have a loss where you think, okay, well, standings wise, that's not a great loss for your team. But Peoria right now is playing better hockey than anyone, and Alec Hagaman is a big reason why. So I'm not happy about saying it either, by the way, but that's the way it is right now. Alec Hagaman right now is the best player in the SPHL.
Yeah, I totally agree. I've been saying that. I'm actually trying to get him to come on the podcast so that everybody else can hear that too. But no, I mean, they won't hear it from him. He's not going to say it. Hockey players never say they're the best. But yeah, I agree. I mean, even if you look back to last year, he was the MVP in the finals. I mean, Alec Hagaman is a game changer, and he got that overtime winner against Quad City, the first of the 2 games. And I mean, it's just, yeah. I mean, and he almost overshadows the rest of the guys on the team. That's why I try to bring up some of their names. But yeah, I mean, I look to see Peoria just staying up top. I mean, especially, they're going to keep playing Vermilion County, and I mean, they've shown that they're going to handle business when it comes to that. And so yeah, they're a fun team to watch too. If anybody out there doesn't, if your team's not playing, I say turn on Peoria, because they're a fun team to watch them play out there. They're fundamentally sound.
Coming to Knoxville this Thursday, if anybody wants to watch on Hockey TV. But I think too, or listen on the Field Pass Hockey app. But I think another thing too is and Alec Bear's really come alive for them. I think they just got one of their goalies back too, so now Eric Levine doesn't have to shoulder the load. But I think Alec Hagaman, after spending so much time in Peoria, going to Pensacola, a franchise that has had not just overall championship success, but recent championship success, and to be able to go and be a part of a team that understands what it takes to win in the postseason, to be able to bring that back to Peoria, I think is good. Like, it could really be a difference in Peoria finally getting over the hump. Yeah. Again, I know I'm making so many people mad with all the stuff that I'm talking about, but those little things that you don't necessarily think, because we in years past, we're not necessarily talking about Alec Hagaman competing for the Kevin Swider scoring award. We know who he is. We know he's a good player, but we're not always talking about him competing for the Swider. Now we're talking about him running away with the Swider, running away with the league MVP, and potentially leading Peoria to a championship. And I think what he went through last year with a different team can kind of change how he is as a captain and as a leader, and how that locker room can change once we get to April.
Definitely. Well said. So that's enough of us pissing everybody off about Peoria because I pump their tires every week too. So let's go Quad City. So we've kind of already talked about all their games, but they're on a 3-game point streak. They went 2-1 over the weekend. They beat Evansville 4-2. They lost obviously to Peoria, and then they won. And Tommy Stang's playing really good. I know a lot of people. He's starting to be the Quad City guy that people don't like too, and I don't know what that's all about. But I'm gonna have to do a little more investigation into that. But he had a 4-point weekend, like 2 goals, 2 assists. Quad City, they were another team. They kind of struggled in the end of December, coming into January. They were fighting for number 1, but it seems like they're starting to get things back together. And we know every time they play Peoria, those are going to be tight games. Those are going to be closely contested games. And it seems like both teams are always going to escape with a point here lately. I don't know how many times they went to overtime. If I was better at this, I'd already have that number up. But it seems like all their games go to overtime. But yeah, I mean, how do you feel about Quad City right now?
I think they have a ton of speed on the perimeter, and they have really good structure in the offensive zone. And so it's kind of similar to what we talked about with Fayetteville when I joined you back in like November, is that Quad City is going to find a really good way to get really good opportunities. And they're also pretty efficient on the rush. So the caveat is I feel like if you can take away the things that they do well, they can struggle to adjust in game. Then they're still a talented team and they're still going to compete and they're going to fight. But their best weapon is how they're able to consistently get into the attacking zone and how they're able to stay there. And so they're going to keep knocking on doors until they bust them down, and they're going to find a way to get goals. And if they get Bailey Birkin back, then I think they're going to be really, really good. Thomas Proudlock's done a nice job for them in net. He's been a good pickup. I know he didn't put up the best numbers when he was in Vermilion County, but I thought he did a really nice job. Even the loss to Knoxville last time I saw Quad City back at the end of January, he made some big saves to keep him in that game as long as he could. And then the persistent special teams from Knoxville, because Knoxville had 4 power play goals in that game. So you can only do so much when your team is shorthanded 11 times in a single game. But that's the thing that would probably concern me about Quad City is discipline and then being able to make in-game adjustments for your offense, because that's the one thing that I've kind of seen from Quad City in the few times that I've watched them is, okay, they'll win a puck battle and then they'll get ticked off and then they'll go after the body instead of going after the puck. And it leads to breakouts going the other way. And so it's just like, there's got to be a couple of loose ends that are tied up, but I do think that, I mean, obviously, since they haven't been in the playoffs before, this is easily the best team that Dave Shinichny has had. He's starting to find in offensive chemistry with his team. But I think Anna Headley even wrote about this for Field Pass. Penalties are a serious concern for this team, and it's driving Dave Shinichny crazy. And so that if they clean up the discipline and they're spending less time in the box, they're going to continue to be really formidable. And I think we've seen that in the games against Peoria. So, yeah, they play Vermilion County a lot, and I know that it's easy to discredit them, but you can't discredit them for how consistently competitive they are against a team like the Rivermen.
Yeah, exactly. And they got another one of those guys. Their captain, Taylor Price, he's one of those guys that was on the team last year with Pensacola that's got some of that knowledge of a winning team. And he's kind of quietly having himself a pretty good little season up there too. But yeah, definitely penalties. That's the problem Birmingham had to start the season out. And I cringe when I hear it now, because I know exactly what Quad City is going through, because I feel like I've seen it with Birmingham for, I don't know, probably ever since the teams existed in the league. But Birmingham's actually kind of found a way to clean it up. But yeah, Quad City, if they can start playing even strength hockey and heck, maybe even get their own power plays, they can be a scary team, because they are playing this team that we just pumped the tires on very competitively and very close every time they play each other. So yeah, that's a team that I'm looking to see really try to, if they can get like we said, if they can figure a way out of the penalty box, they're a team that can be scary and maybe might shake some things up in the come playoff time. So Roanoke next up. So we've already kind of talked a little bit about Roanoke. Well, we talked a lot about them because we talked about Fayetteville and Knoxville. So we'll just touch on them briefly. They went 1-2 over the weekend after having a really good streak. They're back to 500 in their last 10. CJ Stubbs had himself a weekend. He had 3 goals and an assist. It's a team that I don't know. I mean, I don't know how to take away from these teams that are playing the same teams all the time. I mean, you're not going to always beat the same team whenever well, we say that, but everybody's still beating Vermilion County. When you're a team in the middle of the standings,
wow.
I guess. I mean, when
at FPH Bulls, Bobcat
Yeah.
fans, if you want to
Yeah, I
chirp
got
him on
right up
Twitter.
there. It's right there on the screen, so people can see it. But I mean, I think people probably kind of know what I'm saying. They're in the middle of the standings. They're really competitive teams between Fayetteville and Roanoke, as opposed to Vermilion County, who is trying to find their way. And we're going to talk about them in a minute. But yeah, Roanoke, I think, is a good team, and I think Roanoke is just, I don't know what it is. There's just maybe a couple pieces of the puzzle missing, and that would elevate Roanoke to the next level. I mean, I don't know. What's your take on the team?
I think they're built really solid in a goaltender out sort of standpoint, because Austin Rodebush is going to keep them in games, and he's used to playing a lot of games and used to having to make a lot of saves. And it's just wild because before last season, he was pretty much just a backup in the SPHL. He had this breakout season with Knoxville. Now he's really taken
He got
over
waived by the Bulls.
Yeah, like that's the thing. It's just like, oh yeah, Rodebush. Like I remember it was with Roanoke the year before or whatever, but like he was mainly the backup there, and was like kind of having to fight for starts. And then Birmingham released him after a week, and so he came to us because we had Jeremy Brodeur who got called up, so we needed to bring somebody in, and then we decided to part ways with Hayden Stewart. It was just like, so we ended up with DeSalvo and Rodebush, but Rodebush, is that guy that has just, I think, embraced the role and understands like, hey, I spent 2 years pretty much as a backup in the SPHL. I don't want to go back to the Federal. I don't want to go back to being a backup. Like, I'm taking this opportunity for what it is. And I think he's done that really well. But also what they are is so balanced, because Mac Jansen and Jeff Jones are the guys offensively that everybody's going to look at. They don't always play on the same line. And so you really have two solid lines up there up front. And then you look back on the blue line and you have Travis Armstrong, who's a veteran. You have Matt O'Day, who's leading the SPHL in goals by a defenseman. I think he's got 12 already this season, which is kind of unheard of. You don't really see a lot of defensemen getting double-digit goals in the SPHL. And so they have defensemen that can attack and be wise about it, understanding how to get back on the rush, not giving up odd opportunities. And I think I mentioned this earlier in the podcast, but before Saturday's game, Jeff Carr had said, we have an overtime win and a shootout win against Roanoke, and they outplayed us both games. And I think that's the truth. I think Knoxville was really fortunate to come away with points in those two games. And so what you saw from Roanoke is they dominated the first period because they took advantage of their power plays. The game was still scoreless. We're tied at 1 in the final minute of the second period, and Knoxville's dominating that second period. Roanoke gets a fortunate bounce, and then Roanoke understands, okay, we've got the lead going into the third. They have to play catch up. They kept things simple, and then when they got their opportunity at the other end, they took advantage of it. And the thing is that even though it was scoreless through most of the first half of that game, Roanoke was setting up all sorts of chances and just couldn't finish. I mean, Mac Jansen had a wide open net from the right circle and just missed it. There was a great backdoor feed at one point in the second period. Again, just missed it. I mean, missing open nets galore. I mean, Knoxville is at, like, here's the thing. Credit to Knoxville for being able to stick in that game as long as it did, and then got the tough goal to make it 3-1, and then they're having to press from that point on. But honestly, Knoxville is kind of fortunate that it wasn't 4-0 halfway through the second period, just because the quality of chances that Roanoke was producing, they just couldn't get sticks on pucks when it came to setting up those big time passes. So I think Roanoke is going to always be a tough out, just because you have a goalie like Austin Rodebush, you have veteran defensemen that know how to play in this league and don't make mistakes. And then you have a couple of forwards that really anchor your top two forward lines, which allows you to be able to generate offense when you really need it. So Roanoke's a team that I like a lot. They're not a team that I would sleep on. Again, don't be surprised if they can't climb into the top 4 of the standings, because at times they have been very streaky, but don't be surprised to see them pull off some big upset in the first round of the President's Cup playoffs, like we saw them do a couple of years ago when they, swept Peoria after the Rivermen had the best season in the history of the league. So Roanoke's definitely a team that if I'm a top 4 seed, that's the team I don't want to see. By any means. That's because they've matched up really well against Huntsville and Knoxville, and I don't think they've had too many opportunities to play Peoria, if any. Because I know there are certain teams that don't play each other throughout the year.
I don't think they play Peoria this year.
Then that might be one of the ones that I'm thinking of, because I don't remember seeing a score where they've played each other. But I know there are some, like either Fayetteville or Roanoke, they don't play certain teams throughout the course of the season. But if I'm Knoxville or Huntsville and, I drop a couple of games, or say Roanoke drops to the 6th seed, if I'm that 3 line between Peoria, Huntsville, and Knoxville, man, I'm furious that I have to play Roanoke in the first round.
Yeah, yeah. And I think I've gotten to see Roanoke play a few times, and I think they are one of the hardest working teams in the league. I mean, it's just they somehow find a way. Oh, they do. They've already played Peoria twice, by the way. I was looking that up. They lost to Peoria 5-1 on January 7th, and then beat them 3-1 on January 8th. So yeah. And then they're going to play
back.
Yeah, then they got 3 in a row against them in March, and they're all in Peoria. So yeah, that'll be interesting. But yeah, I think they're a really hardworking team, and it just seems like they can do it all if they want to. You know, they got the skill. They can punch you in the mouth if that's the kind of game you want to play. And they're one of my favorite teams to watch play. And I joke about how they always play Fayetteville all the time, but I really love watching those two teams play each other. So I think those are both two fun teams to watch. But yeah, I think we've been running here for a long time. I should probably let's get to the last team on the list, so I can get you on to your night and doing whatever else you got to do today. So Vermilion County. So I don't know what to say good about them. I try to say good things about them all the time, and I mean, I've talked to a couple of their players. They're a great group of guys, but a great group of guys doesn't mean that you're going to win on the score sheet. And so I mean, they went 0-3 this weekend. They're on a 13-game losing streak. They've gotten 1 point in those 13 games. They've gotten outscored. What, they lost 5-1, 7-0, 2-1 over the weekend. The last 2 were to Evansville, and this is just a team that when they do win games, they're not scoring a lot of goals against you. I think when they beat Birmingham, that might have been one of their highest scoring games. I think they scored 4 goals, but I mean, I don't know. I mean, I know they're getting a lot of call-ups all the time, and that might be a thing. I know they're nearing the record of the most call-ups by an SPHL team in a single season. I was told that by somebody. I don't know what that record is, but I know they're nearing it, and it seems like they've had good players in place. They have a goalie that's winning games in the AHL, and I don't know. Houston Wilson was a good addition to the team. But I don't know. I don't know what they need to do to bring it together to try to close this season out on a high note. I've already kind of written them off of the playoffs. No, I haven't I have written them off of the playoffs, but I haven't written them off of the season to where they're going to lose everything. So I don't know. You talk to me about the Bobcats.
I think at this point, Nick Nieder is trying to play the long game, and it's not really a fair situation for him because he's not the head coach at the start of the year. And so Vermilion County undergoes a coaching change. Nieder has to come in, and he's doing everything he can. You know, they're making a ton of transactions. So it's not just call-ups. They're making trades. They're cutting guys. They're having to bring guys in. And so, they've had, everything going on with just trying to figure out who that roster is going to be on a week-to-week basis. And it's been tough because they've had to suspend guys for failure to report after certain trades have been made. And so it's a matter of trying to keep up with all the guys that are being called up, wondering if you're going to get them back. And so I think Nick Nieder is trying to play the long game right now, getting a group of guys that he can at least build a core around. So that way he can protect those guys for next season to put them on the protected list. And if one is needed, and trying to maintain rights for the following year. So it's always so difficult when you're in this situation because most of the time, especially in recent history in the SPHL, when we see these expansion teams, we don't see immediate success. Quad City struggled their first year. Evansville struggled their first year. So Macon struggled their first year. It's just really tough to come in and build a winner because you've got to then get a coach that can go out and recruit. And you don't have this history to sell it on like Pensacola or Huntsville or Knoxville or Fayetteville, where all of these, or Peoria, where all of these fan bases and hockey bases have been established. So Nieder, I think, is having to play a little bit of the long game. I know that there is a hockey tradition in Danville with what they had in the Federal League, but I think at this point in time, it's always tough when you've got a bunch of losses piling up at once, having trouble generating offense. And so I think Nick Nieder is trying to do everything that he can to keep that locker room together and keep finding a way to get guys to play hard. But yeah, anytime you're on a double-digit win streak, which I think it's the second time this season that Vermilion County's lost 10 games or more in a row. It's just tough. And so, I don't think Vermilion County is going to be down forever, but I think you're talking about next year already if you're a Bobcats fan.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, I'm looking at the standings and where they're at. I mean, we know they're that part of it, but they've only got 47 goals for on the season. So, I mean, they're just struggling. They haven't allowed the most goals against. Macon owns that. And I think Macon collected all that in a week. That's how they took the lead in most goals against. But yeah, I think they're, I mean, 3 wins on the season. They're definitely, and I think I agree with you. I think Nick Needard is looking to try to build something there for the future, and that's why. I mean, I think it's nothing unusual to see 4 Vermilion County transactions on the transaction page at any given moment, and it's between call-ups, trades, signs, and signings. I don't know. I mean, I want success for that because I want the league to expand. I don't want that team to go away. So I want your fans, Vermilion County. I want you guys, and I know you listen to it. I know you listen to the podcast. I bring your players on. I hear you. I want you guys to stick with your team. I mean, it does suck for a while. It always sucks. Birmingham didn't have great success when they came into the league 5 years ago. So, I mean, it's just one of those things that I don't know. Things will get better.
Yeah, I mean, it's just kind of the way that it works is, you're seeing the success that Quad City's having now. I mean, Quad City didn't make the playoffs in its first year, and it wasn't going to make the playoffs in the COVID year. It's just, obviously they missed last season because of COVID-19. But I mean, when the season got canceled, they were way out of a playoff spot. And then you look at what Dave Shinichny's done after having a year off and being able to kind of develop his team a little bit. And so that's probably the most recent example. And so it just is the way it is. Evansville struggled their first season, and then they were a playoff team shortly thereafter. So it's not going to happen overnight, but you give it some time and you find a way to start being competitive again. I do think some of the transactions they made have been good. You mentioned Houston Wilson. I like the move to go get Christian Fagas from Huntsville. They just traded for Tommy Municello. So some guys that have at least been in a successful situation before. So maybe that adds some leadership to the locker room to help you kind of churn those guys into a direction of like, hey, this is what it takes to win games. So, and Houston Wilson's a good skill player that can make some things happen in the attacking zone. So it's little by little, but at least, the organization is clearly trying to make things happen to build towards success in the long term.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And I blame the Las Vegas Golden Knights for everybody thinking expansion teams are going to instantly have success. Man. That's what I blame.
I think Seattle's kind of bringing everybody back to earth on
That's right. That's right. Seattle's doing it the way it's supposed to be done. I don't understand how Vegas pulled it off, but yeah. I mean, that's it. That's all we got. That's all we got. I say that's it. We've been going on for an hour and a half, but that's all I got. And if you guys aren't already listening to it, Joel does his podcast for the Knoxville Ice Bears. That's also Field Pass. You can find that on the Field Pass Hockey app. You can find it on all the other podcast spots that the podcasts go out, right?
Yeah, and I appreciate it, James. And I actually just dropped it Monday afternoon, the latest episode. So we got a recap of the weekend, as well as a preview upcoming with Peoria and Pensacola. And we introduced a new segment. We did the mailbag today. So we had Ice Bears fans asking questions, and a lot of them are actually just about like different various things in the league, like who has the rowdiest fans in the SPHL? Some, is Knoxville really the best place to play, or the players are saying that to be nice, like stuff like that. So yeah. I do talk a lot about a lot of other teams in the SPHL. So if you're kind of wanting to hear that, the Knoxville Ice Bears podcast, available on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, and Spotify. You can check that out there. And then, feel free to submit questions for next week too. So, James, I appreciate it. So it's a lot of fun this week, and definitely risky opening up the mailbag right after your team loses 3-3.
Yeah, I might have to steal that idea from you. I always ask people to leave comments on the YouTube video and hit me on Twitter, but nobody ever says anything to me. I even encourage them to tell me that I suck, but they won't do it. So maybe a mailbag. Maybe I got to steal that idea.
You ever considered that maybe you don't suck?
Oh, I mean, then tell me I don't.
Because you tell them to listen to me, and then I tell them, hey, James doesn't suck. Listen to him. Because that's what I've been telling Knoxville fans all season, man.
Yeah, well, I don't know. Maybe. I mean, I just want some feedback. I want you don't have to necessarily tell me how I'm doing. I want to know what they want to hear. If they got questions. I mean, when I bring these players on every week, I'm asking the same old dried up questions to every player. There's got to be something that somebody out there wants to know.
Yeah, but they all result in some crazy non-dry story, like getting deported from Australia or something wacky like that.
Yeah, and definitely, if you guys haven't listened to that one, that was when Casey Kolcheski was on. That was 2 weeks ago or last week. I don't remember.
Something like that.
But yeah, you got to listen to that. Even if you turn it off once he goes off and it's just me rambling on, it's great. But yeah, I mean, it's great. I need more feedback. I need more people to tell me some stuff on here, or maybe not. Maybe I'll regret asking this one day. Who knows?
Stop talking about Alec Hagaman. That's probably the first response.
Yeah,
from
yeah. Oh, I'm sure
TV.
I'll get that one. Yeah, shut up, Peoria sucks. But yeah, you gotta love it. You gotta love him. But that's all I got for everybody this week. Once again, thanks so much for coming on, Joel. We'll definitely have to do this again before the season's over.
Oh yeah, thank you so much for having me. I had a blast.
Yeah. So all right, everybody. So that's episode 17. Until next time.
You've been listening to the Inside the SPHL podcast. Got a topic you'd like discussed? Follow James on Twitter @FPHBulls. For the latest news on the SPHL and the rest of minor league hockey, download the Field Pass Hockey app, now available in the Apple and Android app stores.